Gordon Parks was an African-American pianist, classical composer, writer, and film director. He was also a pioneering photographer and photojournalist who was known for documenting the civil rights movement, poverty, and social issues in America. He used his photography and other art forms to shed light on the struggles of African Americans and other marginalized communities in America, and he worked tirelessly to promote equality and justice for all. Today, Gordon Parks is remembered as one of the most important photographers of the 20th century, and his legacy continues to inspire and influence photographers, filmmakers, and artists all around the world. So today, let's shine the spotlight on Gordon Parks.
Hello, I'm Gordon Parks.
Gordon Parks was born on November 30th, 1912 in Fort Scott, Kansas. He was the youngest of 15 children in a poor African-American family. Parks' mother died when he was young, and he was sent to live with relatives in St. Paul, Minnesota. As a young man, Parks worked a variety of jobs, including playing piano in a jazz band. He even performed with Duke Ellington and other famous musicians of the time. He got into photography by chance. In 1937, he was working in a railroad dining car when he was at a layover in Seattle. He got off the train and went to a theater, and he saw a newsreel footage called The Bombing of the Panay.
Clearly marked with American flags, the Panay was a neutral, presumably guaranteed safe passage. Then, without warning, Japanese planes attacked.
The man who shot the footage happened to be in the audience with Gordon.
And they said, Norman Alley is here. And he jumped out on the stage, and he had a white suit on, and they got a big applause. They stood up, because he had stayed right by the gunship until it sank.
Attracted to the glamour, Parks was intrigued, and when he got off work, he bought his first camera, a Voigtlander Brilliant, at a pawn shop, and began teaching himself photography. In 1940, at the age of 28, Gordon Parks walked into Frank Murphy's fashion department store in St. Paul, Minnesota. With no true formal experience in fashion work, he boldly offered his services to photograph models wearing the store's fashions.
What makes you think you can shoot fashions? I said, well, I've seen Vogue and I've seen Harper's Bazaar and so forth and so on. I've watched those magazines and I know what I can do. She said, I'm going to give you a chance.
Parks was given the chance to prove himself. With borrowed equipment, Parks made his way through the fashion shoot that would undoubtedly launch his career in photography. Unfortunately, he made a mistake.
Frank was impressed suddenly, and Madeline was impressed. Even I was impressed.
Yes, you were.
until about 12 o'clock that night, I developed the film. I double exposed everything on the camera Harvey had given me because it was a speed graphic, and I'd never used it before. I didn't know how to change the back, so I double exposing everything.
Luckily, one portrait, seen here, made it through, and it was enough to showcase his potential, and he was given another chance. He then went on to shoot all of the department store's fashions. In 1942, Gordon Parks received the Julius Rosenwald Fellowship to support his career as a photographer. The Rosenwald Fellowship granted him $1,800, the equivalent of almost $35,000 today, to move to Washington, D.C. and apprentice for 1 year under a man named Roy Stryker at the Farm Security Administration. The purpose of the FSA was to resettle American farmers who had lost their land during the Dust Bowl. They set up a unit of filmmakers and photographers to document what they were doing. Here is where he took one of his most famous photographs, American Gothic, Washington, D.C. The photograph features Ella Watson, a government cleaning employee who worked at the Farm Security Administration. Parks met Watson while working for the FSA and was struck by her dignified and resolute presence despite the difficult circumstances of her life. The photograph shows Watson standing in front of an American flag, holding a broom in one hand and a mop in the other. The composition of the photograph is reminiscent of Grant Wood's famous painting, American Gothic, which depicts a stern-looking farmer and his daughter standing in front of a house with a similar pitchfork and a similar sense of resoluteness. Parks's photograph was a powerful commentary on the inequalities and injustices faced by African Americans at the time. The broom and mop in Watson's hands symbolized the hard work and menial jobs that were often the only opportunities available for African Americans in the segregated South. The American flag in the background represents the country's ideals of freedom and equality, which were not yet fully realized for African Americans. American Gothic is a powerful and iconic image that continues to resonate to this day, and it is widely considered one of Gordon Parks' most important photos. In 1948, Gordon proposed a piece to Life magazine editor-in-chief Wilson Hicks. The piece was to be on the gang wars that were consuming Harlem in the late 1940s. To quote Lonnie Bunch, the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Life magazine was the Bible. People read the newspaper or listened to the radio, but for many people, it really was Life magazine that helped them understand what was going on in America. The photo essay would go on to consist of 21 images and accompanying text and tell the story of gang leader Red Jackson and his gang, the Midtowners. The photographs show Jackson and his gang members in their neighborhood, in their homes, and engaged in various activities such as gambling, fighting, doing dishes, reading with younger brothers. The images are powerful and raw, capturing both the violence and the humanity of the gang members. What sets Harlem gang leader apart from other photo essays of the time is Gordon Parks' approach to his subject. Rather than simply portraying the gang members as violent criminals, he sought to understand their lives and the social conditions that led them to join a gang. He spent time getting to know Jackson and his gang members, and the resulting photographs are a sensitive and nuanced portrayal of their world. The photo essay was a breakthrough for Gordon Parks and for Life magazine, and is now considered a landmark in the history of documentary photography. It helped to pave the way for a new approach to photojournalism, one that focused on telling human stories with empathy and understanding. This led to Parks being hired as a staff photographer for the magazine, making him the first African-American photographer to work for the publication.
Life magazine is the headquarters for photographer Gordon Parks on the staff of the popular pictorial news magazine since 1949, and a man who stands at the top of his profession. Whether he turns his lens to fashion or to graphic essays, Gordon Parks' style is unmistakable.
During his 20-year career at Life magazine, Parks produced some of his most famous photographs, including a photo essay on the segregation of schools in the American South and a series of portraits of Muhammad Ali. Gordon Parks was often criticized as much as he was applauded for his position at Life, and he was very aware of being in a conflicted position. He talked about how he was often seen as Life's, quote, black photographer, and that he was creating stories meant for a white audience. In addition to his work as a photographer, Parks was also a filmmaker, writer, and musician. He directed several films, including the adaptation of his own semi-autobiographical novel, The Learning Tree, in 1969. It was the first time that a black director had the opportunity to direct a major Hollywood studio film.
Baby's gone, my baby's gone. 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 My baby's gone.
He directed several other films, including the groundbreaking 1971 movie Shaft, which is widely considered to be one of the defining films of the blaxploitation era. As mentioned, Parks was a vocal advocate for civil rights and used his photography to highlight issues of social injustice. He photographed important figures such as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., and his work was often used in the struggle for civil rights. His photography is highly regarded for its powerful storytelling, technical skill, and social commentary. He often captured the lives and struggles of African Americans during a time of significant social and political change in the United States. His photographs provided a window into the experiences of people who were often overlooked or marginalized in mainstream society. Here we have another famous Gordon Parks photo, Department Store, Mobile, Alabama. This photograph was part of Gordon Parks' 1956 photo essay for Life magazine, documenting segregation in the South. The essay served as crucial documentation of the Jim Crow South and acted as a national platform for challenging racial inequality. However, his images from this essay look quite different from many other iconic civil rights photographs. In an era when the primary medium for documentary photography was black and white film, Parks instead chose to present these quiet images of domestic life in full color. Gordon Parks' photography has been widely celebrated. However, like any artist, his work has also faced criticism. One common criticism of Parks' photography is that it could be seen as reinforcing stereotypes about African Americans. Some critics argue that Parks' images of poverty, crime, and social struggle can perpetuate negative stereotypes about African Americans rather than challenging or subverting them. Another criticism of Parks's work is that it could be seen as perpetuating a white gaze. Some critics argue that Parks's images were created for a predominantly white audience, and were intended to provide a window into the lives of African Americans for a white audience, rather than celebrating the richness and complexity of African American culture on its own terms. And finally, some critics have argued that Parks's work can be seen as reinforcing a great man theory of history, in which individual heroes are celebrated for their accomplishments, rather than focusing on the collective struggle for social change. It's worth noting that these criticisms are not universally held, and many scholars and critics actually continue to celebrate Parks's work as an important contribution to American cultural history. Gordon Parks has several pieces of advice for budding photographers based on his own experiences and successes. For starters, he said, "You have to get beyond the equipment and get to the relationship. It's the relationship that matters." He also said you have to be ready for anything, including failure, because failure is a teacher. He also said photography is a small voice at best, but sometimes one photograph, or a group of them, can lure our sense of awareness. And finally, he said the subject matter is so much more important than the photographer. Gordon Parks died on March 7th, 2006, at the age of 93. He left behind an incredible body of work and a legacy as one of the most important photographers of the 20th century, whose work continues to influence and inspire generations of photographers and artists to this day. Gordon Parks was an incredibly important figure in American culture. As a photographer, a filmmaker, a writer, a musician, he was a true multi-hyphenate who used his artistic talents to shed light on important issues such as social injustice, poverty, and civil rights. His legacy as the first African-American photographer to work for Life magazine, as well as the first African-American to direct a major Hollywood studio film, opened doors for generations of artists of color, inspiring the likes of Spike Lee, Ava DuVernay, Devin Allen, LaToya Ruby Frazier, and Jamel Shabazz. By telling important stories through his art, Parks helped shape American culture and push it toward greater inclusivity and understanding. Parks's gift as a visionary artist, as a social activist, as a cultural icon, make him an essential figure in American history and culture, and make him worthy of the spotlight. I'll leave this video, like I leave all of these videos, with more photos by Gordon Parks. And there will be links in the description for more information on Gordon Parks, where you can look at his work, including his films and his writing. I urge all of you out there to dive into his work head on and allow it to inspire and inform your work in the future. Thank you to those of you out there who have been watching and liking and subscribing and commenting. Let me know which photographers I should cover next in this series, and while you do that, enjoy these photos by the great Gordon Parks.
It was secondhand. And I went and asked for how much I could get it for. He said, "Well, $12. I said, "Well, I don't have $12. I got about 10. He said, "Well, I'll sell it to you for $7.50. I said, "Okay," and I bought it. I said, "I don't know how to load it," and he didn't know how to load it. So there was a man standing by. He said, "I'll show you how to load it," and he loaded it for us and said, "This is the way you put the film in, this is the way you take it out," and so forth. So I got a couple extra rolls of film, and I went down with a Puget Sound. I was in Seattle, Washington, and started shooting around with things I saw, and seagulls and so forth. And I got overbalanced and went over and fell into Puget Sound. I held my camera up, and somebody hollered, and then the firemen were down about, I guess about 100 feet from the pier, and the fireman got down and fished me out. I was still holding the camera up like that so it didn't get wet.